Hello and welcome to Treasures in Heaven. I'm your host here today, Daniel Catone. I'm the CEO and founder of Arimathea, along with the true CEO of Arimathea, St. Joseph of Arimathea. I'm here with two awesome guests today. Normally I have one guest. In fact, I think this is the first time I've ever had two guests. And so I have probably the most important people that I know in artificial intelligence. And we're going to do a deep dive today into the Catholic approach to artificial intelligence, to a conference that we attended together, the three of us, in Vatican in Rome just a few weeks ago. But my first guest is the president of Arimathea, Andrew DeBerry. Andrew is a lieutenant colonel in the reserves in the Air Force. He has a deep background in this subject, having both done AI monetization at Meta, along with work at Verizon and other tech companies along the way. He is absolutely one of the biggest thought leaders on this subject. I'm also here with Taylor Black, and Taylor is the director of the Leonum Institute at Catholic University of America. I hope we can learn a little bit about that today too. He's also a director at Microsoft in the CTO's office for artificial intelligence and venture ecosystems. Microsoft's doing some incredible things in this space. Hopefully you can tell us all of their trade secrets today. I'm half joking, but welcome to the show, gentlemen.
Great to be here. Thanks for having us, Daniel.
It's exciting. You know, before we were launching this podcast, we were chatting, and Taylor, you and I have only just recently gotten to know each other a little bit, and we have so much in common, and it's really cool. I guess my joke, I don't have a lot of jokes. I have a lot of dad jokes, and none of them are funny, but one of my jokes is there's 1.5 billion Catholics, but there's really only 10,000 of us, and we're all connected. And so we were joking about common friends that we all have. And in which is also very incredible is I am a subdeacon, and Taylor is now a subdeacon, and he's about to become father deacon, God willing, here in the summer. So I want to say congratulations. And I would ask everybody who's listening and watching this show, first of all, when we're done, to pray for probable father deacon, Taylor Black, so that we can do the Lord's will here on earth. So welcome, Taylor.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, I need your prayers, and yes, you have mine.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I want to say I get made fun of on my other podcast sometimes. My other podcast, which everyone should like and subscribe if you have a chance, which is the Theology of Money. It's myself and Dr. Pia De Solani and Dr. Christopher Bloom and Chris Owens out on the East Coast. And, one week I'll be Mr. AI, and the next week I will be Mr. Anti-AI, because I think I'm a bit in this brackish water phase where I'm not really sure if artificial intelligence is a good idea or a bad idea. But the reality is it's here. And, there's an old saying that you might not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in you. And I think the same is true for artificial intelligence. We might not all be interested in artificial intelligence, but boy, oh boy, is it changing our lives for the better and maybe for the worse too. And we're going to explore that a little bit from a Catholic lens. And maybe I can start with you, Andrew, a little bit. It's kind of an unusual time to be alive. And there's that ancient Chinese proverb that may you live in interesting times. It's both a proverb, I think, as a curse. And we certainly do live in interesting times. So Andrew, can you start us off by maybe giving us a lay of the land of where AI is in relation to Catholicism?
For sure.
Simple question to start with, of course.
Sure. I can offer a summary of what I see technically, and Taylor can certainly add perspective from the Microsoft view, and then where the church seems to be engaging. So at the highest level, I personally do believe that this is a huge historic moment in our faith, in technology, and also in our businesses in many countries. So with the evolution of AI, we're able to extend not just what our physical bodies are able to do in the previous industrial revolution, but now with AI, we're able to extend our minds and our intellect, and that has deeper implications on the social contract that we have. And so especially with the transformer models that is able to synthesize and recreate decades of text and really a millennia of human experience, it brings about deeper questions about who we are fundamentally as people. And so the church, it recognizes that this is a valuable topic, and there's a lot it has to say, because it may have had some couple thousand years of reflecting on what our human social values should be. So to address that, so far, the Vatican in 2020 had put out the Rome Call to Ethics, and it has some common baseline standards, which are also common in the secular and technical industry, concepts such as transparency, fairness, human control, and those are all well and good. Since then, there have been more implications about, well, what does this mean more specifically in verticals like education or in warfare? And so in January of this year, Pope Francis's leadership had put out Antiqua et Nova, and that articulates not only those same principles, but then some applications inside of these specific verticals. And right now, there is a big open canvas for how people of goodwill can address this topic. Pope Leo certainly is leading in this space as well. He has asserted that this is a reason why he selected the name that he did as a follow-on to Pope Leo XIII to address the previous Industrial Revolution. Pope Leo XIV sees that AI is going to be guiding this as well. And so while Pope Leo is still deciding the position he wants to take and the leaders that are going to guide that, as he wasn't expecting to become the pontiff when he entered the conclave, there's some discernment that he's still doing that is still an open time for the lay leaders and the rest of us to do grassroots initiatives like the early church and put out there what we think should be happening. And so the forum that we did at the Vatican was really a gift, and having experts like Taylor coming from Microsoft and from CUA speaking truth to both the techno piece and the faith-based perspective is really key. So I think this is a beautiful time for us to articulate the good things that AI can do for humanity in general, address head-on some of the interesting narratives and manifestos that are coming largely out of Silicon Valley, and then articulating and speaking into that a new faith-centered vision for what the future of humanity can look like.
I appreciate those comments very much. I might maybe a little remiss in, or I guess maybe I'm making a mistake in assuming that every single person listening to this podcast or watching this podcast has the level of depth that we all have on this subject, and that might not be the case. Andrew, if I can just ask you one simple question, if you can answer just in a couple sentences, and I'll turn to you, Taylor, with some questions that I have. What is artificial intelligence?
Sure. So artificial intelligence fundamentally is computing that mimics human behavior. And so one way to think about it is that humans have 5 different senses, and over time, AI has been able to start to mimic vision with computer vision or speech with natural language processing. And another key component is the algorithmic aspect, where the algorithms are able to learn what ground truth is, make predictions for what it is, and then identify the error and then back propagate that inside of a system so that it starts to make itself more accurate. Transformer models have been very transformative, and this is a way of synthesizing humongous amounts right now, especially of text, and then just using probability and statistics to come up with what looks like fresh, innovative ideas when really they're just statistical probabilities of what the next word in a sentence might be. So it's a big key.
Yeah, I think you're onto something with the probability issue. And I think we should probably flush that out a little bit. And perhaps I can come to you, Taylor, on this first question that I have on that subject. It seems as if, to me, a layperson who does not work in artificial intelligence directly, but I deal with the artificial intelligence pretty much every day of my life, whether I like it or not. But one of the things that I've come to learn, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, which is very common, artificial intelligence knows nothing. It just predicts probable outcomes or potential next steps or these types of things. It's just a math model that deals with probabilities of how likely is it that this word follows that word or this image follows that image or pixel or whatever. Am I off base there, or maybe you can help me understand?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on there, because it gets to the nature of what it means to know, right? In our kind of Catholic anthropology of what that means, what it means to know, is kind of the thing that happens when we have an insight. When you have an insight, when you have that aha moment, what you're doing from a Catholic anthropological sense is you are grasping something true or grasping an aspect of being that ends up you saying this is real or this is true or this has meaning. AI can't do that unless you've told it, when you see this, say to yourself, this is true, or when you see this, say to yourself, this has meaning. And it is this huge probability statistical model generation sort of thing. Now, I don't want to diminish how incredibly cool that is, right? There's this kind of irony as well that is statistical in that sense, where we may not know exactly what the answer is, but we know kind of in a certain range, and we use that kind of thinking all the time, and it's a very scientific mode of our thinking. and AI can be a fantastic helper and tool along those lines. But making that assertion that what I have grasped exists is part of being, it just can't be done by anything other than humans right now.
You're singing my tune here. I do like philosophy, and I might not know a lot about tech in comparison to you gentlemen, but philosophy is interesting to me. And one of the things that you said that I thought was very interesting was the concept of meaning and possession of knowledge. And I would argue, as I was in a small group, like a working committee of sorts at the Gregorian in Rome with you guys, one of the ideas is a human being perceives reality, pulls the reality into their mind through symbols, and then creates meaning of those symbols. In a sense, our brains are pattern recognizing machines, which are connected in some way to consciousness and all these other issues, right? But it seems as if, and again, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, Taylor, that AI at this point is not able to assign meaning to knowledge because it doesn't possess knowledge yet.
Yeah, and I don't know if it ever really will. That's an open question, and in some ways, it to me is like it's great to talk about it over a pint, like in a theoretical sort of sense.
No, it's 10:50 in the morning here, I think.
Yeah, no, it's good. A pint of coffee, I live in Seattle. So, but I think that I don't want to say it's the wrong question because it's a great question to think about. But I think the better framing for AI is really going back to that pattern recognition that you noted, is it's a patterner of experience. It allows you to kind of pattern that, the data of reality, whether it's text, whether it's images, whether it's video, we're moving into audio and the other senses that we have, patterning it in different ways so that it helps us come to the insight, the grasping of a truth, of a reality. And for that, it's fantastic. It's one of the greatest things that humans have created for coming to understandings, knowing that we still have to do the work of the understanding.
That's fascinating what you just said about the senses. And I want to explore this a little bit more. It seems as if to me that artificial intelligence at this point is capable of a type of mimicry or of the senses in a sense. Specifically, it kind of acts like eyes in its viewing of images. It sort of acts like ears if it were to do audio or video or things like that. But those are all external to the mind. Those are the sensory input systems, but it still requires a conscious observer to give meaning to that which the artificial intelligence is manipulating and presenting in some way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, certainly. I think it's accurate, and it has to, right? Because the only way the AI is able to do anything cool is because of the underlying intelligibility of the data that it has been trained on. If you trained it on randomness, you would get randomness back. But if you train it on the corpus of everything written by humans, there's ostensibly some intelligence in that, right? And it's that underlying intelligence that we perceive as coming through the statistical modeling that helps replicate the intelligence that was in the data set.
I see. Well, Andrew, let me go to you on this question, or this kind of thing that I'm postulating, is this idea that artificial intelligence is sort of replicating sensory input, but not able to replicate or actually participate in consciousness, but is something analogous to, or even patterned like consciousness, but in reality it is not conscious. And that was my study group, is determining whether AI is conscious, which it ain't. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But Andrew, can you maybe talk about your perspective on artificial intelligence in relation to consciousness and sensory input?
Sure. So the part that I get excited about is the integration with the human experience. And for me, that serves as a point that while there's a lot of worthwhile discussion about consciousness and AGI or ASI, artificial superintelligence, I think, especially for the church, it is key for us to awaken to all of these builders, not, I think, the debate about AGI, but AHI, augmenting human intent. And as a tool, AI is able to multiply that human intent. If we see social media had done so with our opinions and our thoughts, AI can certainly do this in a more physical, tangible way. Once we start infusing AI into physical objects, well, wow, that is a very different world. And how we look at the human intent will separate whether or not AI does ultimately hurt us, or if it does things that are beautiful and deepens our relationship with each other and with our Lord. So
That's very, very insightful.
there are ways to factor that human experience inside of the design. I would love to hear more from the product design community and the UX community for how do we ensure that it is close to what makes us intimately human. And I strongly agree that this is not a conscious being, but when we talk about ASI or AGI, I need those deep thinkers to start articulating some design principles so that it honors that humanity, the fundamental meaning that you and Taylor have been addressing.
Interesting. I think I'm going to try to be as diplomatic as I can be here. It seems as if intent is a huge question mark with the development of artificial intelligence, and that there are participants in the community which is ideating artificial intelligence concepts that, in my opinion, are bad actors, that they do not share our values as Catholics. They do not share this idea that you're trying to illustrate, I think, very well, Andrew, and that is augmentation of human intent, but a replacement of the person. And I'll never have him on my show because I don't think it would go very well for us. But, if I look at somebody like Sam Altman, I don't think we share any values in common, or at least fundamental basic principles. And I do find his last name ironic, deeply ironic, Altman. And I think the replacement of the human with the machine is demonic and dangerous. But then I talk to folks like you, Taylor, which gives me hope. I have hope because there are thoughtful Catholic or people of goodwill. He doesn't have to be Catholic necessarily, working in this space to try to bring artificial intelligence to us through an ethical parameter. And I'd love for you to please talk to us about how do you see this intent problem of the developers? I mean, I hear, for example, Anthropic's entire concept, Anthropic, of course, being an artificial intelligence company, they sort of were grown out of this. We need to be super safe with artificial intelligence development in opposition to some of the other names out there that are just whole hog all the way in, like what they're doing in China, I believe. So it does feel a little bit like Narnia, Battle of Good and Evil here. But can you talk a little bit about that, Taylor?
Yeah, certainly.
You don't have to say anything mean about your bosses.
Oh yeah, no worries. And yeah, as you know, what I say represents my thinking, not necessarily Microsoft's or Catholic views. And first off, I think using Aquinas's heuristic of generosity, which I'll sum up for this moment as never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by a poor anthropology.
I like that.
And so I think in many cases, it's a lot of people attempting to do what they think is good for their understanding of what the human person is. Unfortunately, of course, there's a lot of impoverished views on what the human person is. And so and I'll give you a really simple example in an interface of a theoretical chatbot, right? You could imagine a high school student kind of going to a chatbot, using it as a replacement for search, which is where the technology is really leading us. And in all honesty, asking a couple of questions around a research project that they're trying to write an essay for. And so they're like, tell me about the Ents in Lord of the Rings, and where Tolkien kind of came up with that, right? And whether they actually met the Entwives in Hobbiton. And it comes back with the answer drawn from all of human writing about what people think about Treebeard and the Ents. And at the end of that response, it has a prompt for you to do something else. Now imagine that prompt says, would you like me to write that essay for you? Or imagine the prompt says, would you like to understand where Tolkien may have gotten this concept of talking trees and deepen your understanding of this whole space in which Tolkien is working? Now notice the two kind of theoretical anthropologies that one might be able to impute to those two different responses. One is, this human is trying to get something done. I'm going to help this human get something done. Or the other one is, wait a second, this human's wrestling with a question, and it seems like they need to work on it a little bit more to become more intelligent around the kind of question that they're asking and the thing that they are trying to do here. Both can be well-intentioned, but both have a very different view of what the human is trying to do, not only as a human, but also the human in the moment of asking that particular question. And so what I've really noticed with this whole AI thing in tech is that it is unpacking a bunch of our assumptions at a much deeper level with regard to user intent, as Andrew was saying, and who the user is in this whole context in the first place. And it's exciting to me because what it's opening up is that a lot of people realize that they have not really thought to these questions or wrestled with these questions in a lot of the education that they've had up until that point. And so I have colleagues in tech from all walks of life and backgrounds asking the question, what does it mean to be human? Which is, of course, something the Catholic Church has been attempting to have everybody ask for the last 2,000 years. And so it's a very exciting moment to me. And of course, it's fraught with all of the spiritual warfare that the Catholic Church also recognizes is weaves throughout all of our lives and all of our actions. And indeed, every interaction we have with another person either helps them up towards heaven or down towards hell, as C.S. Lewis reminds us. But I think taking that view of it, of actually everybody has the spark of the divine, leading us towards theosis, and it's that we should cultivate rather than necessarily jumping into it in a warfare sense. I think that ends up being a much more productive conversation, and indeed kind of meets humanity as humans rather than something they aren't.
Yeah. I appreciate your call to charity, because we should not assume bad intentions of anybody. And I try not to. I just kind of judge the thing by the fruits. And I watched an interview this morning with Jensen Huang, the CEO of, I think that's how you say his last name. Is that how you say it, Andrew? Huang? Yeah. I watched an interview of him. He's the CEO, of course, of NVIDIA. I think he's one of the most important people in the world right now. And he said something really interesting. But also a little disturbing. He said within 2 or 3 years, 90% of all ideas will be generated. There's all kinds of debates on what's happening there by artificial intelligence. And he then made the statement, which I think that's probably true. But he is also selling a product. Obviously, he wants everybody to buy his chips. But also he said, what's the difference between someone learning from a textbook versus learning from artificial intelligence? And I would argue there's a significant difference between learning from a textbook or an instructor versus, and I'll take the instructor first. Were you on to say something? Go ahead, Taylor.
No. Communication. Okay. No.
Yeah.
Unpack. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to unpack here is, it's kind of like if you go to a robot for medical healing. Okay. Maybe you are healed, but then there's no person doing an act of charity to you. So the goodness is reduced. And so in the process of learning, you have the teacher and you have the student. And there is a dualism of growth between both parties, where the student is obtaining knowledge and possession of knowledge. We're going to come back to that because I have some thoughts there. The student is learning something. They're being shown reality, converting it into symbols in their mind, applying meaning to that. And now they're in possession of reality. And then the teacher also is fulfilling the will of God by assisting another child of God in examining nature or reality or whatever it is so that they can grow closer to the Father. When you completely remove the human teacher, you've really cut off half the advantage of what it means to learn as a human. Does that make sense? What do you think, Taylor?
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I think you're right there. But I think there's a key difference, perhaps, in the interaction between the teacher and the student and the textbook, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I think the difference is that, right, is when you're working with a teacher, whether it's in written medium or in oral medium, they're having a conversation with you and shaping your meaning while in a triadic sort of sense, right? In a dialogue where they're learning and you're learning as part of the cycle. Now, A book is somewhat different, right? A book, the teacher is attempting to teach people broadly, and is being very thoughtful about what I would call their outer words, the words they're putting down on the page, that represent the inner word, which is the only thing that humans have, and AI has no inner word. And the inner word, in the Aquinas sense, of course, right, is the understanding of reality that you have grasped, that you now have to put into an articulation, whether that be, through art or through
possession and transmission.
Yep, exactly. And that second, that outer word is the expression of the understanding of reality that you have, that you've grasped. And so there's a chunk of that in books, of course, too. But there isn't kind of the feedback loop to the author as part of the person reading it. And so there's a certain part of me that is more okay with AI playing around with the formulation of that outer word, so that, maybe if it rewrote the book, I would understand it better, because it's a statistical generation based on the inner words that the author was attempting to convey in the first place. Now, every poet, novelist, artist, all of the beautiful work that we've ever written or read in our lives would, and seen in our lives, would push back against that, and rightly so.
I'm about to push back.
Right, because it's the statistical generation. It might happen to be easier for me to understand, but there was no intent behind it, so it would be a happenstance sort of thing. Part of me is okay with that in certain learning contexts, because not every textbook I've ever read was beautiful in that sense. There's a conveying of information that ends up being kind of like 80%-ish, if I was to put my finger in the air, of a lot of like knowledge gathering or transmitting ideas between people, that I'm more or less okay with it being statistically generated, because that 20% is where humans have that deep craft and has all of those, paragraphs and poems and sayings and lines that we've memorized because they're so beautiful as an expression of that secondary insight of formulation. That is important. And so where you want to put that slider is fine with me. And maybe you want to say that it all has to be human, and the conveying of information is accidental, and it's supposed to be this communion of minds. And I'd be okay with that too, but it's open for argument to me.
Well, I think it depends on the method and the method of transmission and what the information is. So a stop sign has data that is transmitted through symbols to our minds. I have no problem with that being AI, that level of data. I think where it becomes problematic is what are you trying to apprehend when you're reading a novel? What you're trying to apprehend is what the author is intending for you to apprehend. That's really what you're trying to do. You're not reading the novel to understand reality divorced from the author. We can look at this in sacred scripture is a great example of this. And so if AI moves into this realm of replacement of the instructor or the author, we will be losing understanding of each other's minds. Because when I read James Joyce, or if I read Dickens or Shakespeare or whoever, I'm not only coming to know the knowledge contained within the language, I'm coming to know Shakespeare, the man. I'm coming to know the man, Dickens, and so on. But AI is not able to do that. Does that make sense, Andrew, or I'm off base?
Yeah, it seems that we want to listen to the relation aspects of that education and how that factors into that overall experience. So there's a deeper humanity and a deeper dialogue that when it's at its best, we are honoring that full experience, not just the transactional piece of getting that fact or getting that intellect, that there's a more important social connection that happens through the experiences that we have in education.
I think that's fair. I want to switch gears a little bit. When we were in Rome, kind of crazy year for me. I met Pope Francis on Valentine's Day this year. I was just about the last person other than his retinue of security that was with him before he was taken to the hospital that day, and came out a month later and said goodbye to all of us. And now it's with the Lord. And then when I was in the Rome just a couple weeks ago with you guys, we received a letter from Pope Leo, which is, if you had asked atheist Dan, 25 years ago, about meeting the Pope and getting a letter from him in the same year, I would have laughed at you. But what I was kind of going to get into here is Pope Leo. He wrote these words while we were in the conference, and I'm going to just read them for a second. Holiness must blossom precisely where decisions are made that affect the lives of thousands of families. The world needs entrepreneurs and leaders who, out of love for God, there's the intent, and neighbor, work for an economy that serves the common good. So my first loaded question to you, Taylor, is does artificial intelligence in its current form serve the common good?
In its current form. Very interesting.
Or is there work to do?
There's work to do. I don't think it does serve the common good in its current form.
How about you, Andrew?
I absolutely do think it does.
I love this. Okay, now we're going to go somewhere. So Taylor, tell me why it does not serve the common good.
Well, I think there's kind of three reasons why it doesn't at the moment. One, we haven't brought along the better human anthropology with the tool. And so at the moment, the tools encourage one to offload one's thinking to the machine rather than to do it oneself, unless you already have been bastioned with a good understanding of how you yourself operate and how humans operate in general. And of course, we're kind of on the upswing with regard to how this impacts work. We're kind of on the upswing with regard to how data centers and their massive energy consumption kind of affect our planet and our world. I see it trending in great ways, but at the moment, if you were to take the snapshot of today, I think we're still in kind of the era of social media with regard to how this is impacting people, unless we listen to the Lorax, as it were.
Oh, that's funny. My daughter dressed up as the Lorax for Halloween.
Such a great book.
It's a great book. But Andrew, I think you might even agree with Taylor's critique there, but can you approach this from the AI as supportive of the common good, and how so, that we currently have?
Yeah. So, I mean, in Catholic social teaching, we look for common criteria like it strengthens human family, it lifts up the vulnerable, it strengthens relationships and community. And AI can do what we want it to do right now. It can provide to us tools that we've never had in human history before at our fingertips to do good things. And so is the AI good or bad, or supporting the common good or not? Or is it the human beings that are using it with the intent of using it for the common good or not? When it comes to reducing the drudgery of tasks, when it comes to making things that take an unnecessary amount of time and pain that doesn't add a lot of value, there's some social good that there's now new tools that make it more possible to do that. I'm not saying that this is a blank check that, great, you now have the moral goodness to do all the things. I strongly agree that we need the principles and the invitation for how to do that in a holistic way. And all the points that Taylor raised about anthropology and the values that we have, in the Catholic Builder conversations, they are really trying to articulate an ontology for how do we explain human relationships and our common humanity. But in terms of the good that can be unlocked and the human progress that can be achieved, I do want to kind of push beyond this conversation, but the broader church to see all of the good that can be done. We have so much opportunity at our fingertips. Yes, we need to identify principles to do and not do, but there's a big space that we're just getting started. There's already been some good that's been created. We can keep promoting the common good at the societal level, at the family level, at the community level. Again, as long as we have that human intent identified and proceed very strongly in that direction.
I love your optimism. Actually, I love both of your optimisms. And somehow you were able to answer my question in the negative very optimistically, Taylor. That's good. I guess there's a fundamental problem here that I want to bring up, and this is this question of ethical limitations on the development of artificial intelligence. So here in the United States, let's give Sam and all the other folks out there benefit of the doubt that they want to put in ethical guidelines and make sure that children are not exploited and all these other problems that come out of artificial intelligence. Let's say that's all their intents. Is that the intent of our near peer competitors outside the United States, in China, Russia, other places like that? I would argue absolutely not. I don't think China has any interest in ethical limitations on artificial intelligence. There's been no demonstration that they have any interest in those subjects. Okay. And it's a problem of nation states that if the United States limits itself in the development of artificial intelligence because of ethical concerns and anthropology and all these things that we're talking about, how can we do that and still stay relevant in comparison to nations like China that just pull the reins off the horse and hit it in the rear and let it go? How about you, Taylor?
Yeah, well, I think I won't necessarily comment on the relations between nation states, but there's always creativity within the frame. So I wouldn't say that being able to pull off all ethical guidelines and be able to hit the horse actually necessarily gets you anywhere better, faster than having guidelines and having things that you have to make the model do in order to fit within how we want to design and our technology and live with our technology. I think that's I think the assumption is fundamentally false. And so I think that a lot of interesting things can come out of us as humans voting with our feet of, no, I'm going to use this other kind of technology because it does a better job of serving me and my human flourishing. And sure, regulation can happen at some point in time too. It generally lags behind the technological advances, so it's not my tool of choice for guiding emerging technology. Mostly because I don't think it can very well. That's, I think, much better done by voting with our feet, by voting with our dollars, since in the end we own all of these public companies by and large with our dollars and the market, and with people who care about humans working inside all of these different companies too. But I reject fundamentally the if you just let it be free, it's going to be better, and we have to be free too in order to keep up with the competition.
It's fair, Taylor. Let me narrow down my argument then, and I'm going to turn to Andrew here to hear his response, because it's a defense military argument, and that is, we are hopefully not going to be creating autonomous drone systems that use artificial intelligence to independently target and destroy targets that it wishes to on its own will, I hope, at the United States. I have a strong feeling that China does not have such ethical concerns. So if we were to narrow the scope down, perhaps not, nation states and the big ideas of AI and ethics, and really focus on the use within defense, which is a specific issue in Catholic social teaching that we have to address. How would you face that issue, Andrew, in terms of ethical limitations on technological development for defense industries and use, and still competitiveness as a nation?
For sure. I'll answer at two levels. One is, as with the church and the broader AI values conversation, government and international governments do have longstanding principles for how to answer these kinds of questions. So at the UN level, there are the laws of armed conflict, and that restricts the ability to do disproportionate attacks, to leverage using war as a last resort, which has the influence from Catholic just war theory. So these principles will continue to hold, and that will prevent the ability to use autonomous, lethal decisions when it comes to autonomous vehicles. And that's been a longstanding DoD instruction for some time. But the second level to this question is the dilemma you raised earlier is like, well, that's great for anyone that supports a global treaty, but what about the countries that don't? And certainly
non-state actors.
And that is tough. And I raised this question to the Vatican's AI ethicist, Father Paolo Bonazzi, and he highlighted maybe a technical solve here can be trying to address this at the technical standards level, that if we can ensure certain principles are baked into the infrastructure itself, it's not just at the end application there, that can influence the values orientation of the broader platform. So as an example, we've seen this administration's wrestled with, well, do we allow NVIDIA to sell its chips to China or not? And one argument for it is, well, the more that it's an American ally-based stack, the more we can influence what's happening. And but
turn it off.
Oh, that's true. That control, absolutely. And then, of course, the counter argument is, well, if we're doing this, are we not also accelerating the bad? And so that is an interesting debate, and I do think we should keep having that debate. I'm going to go off of what should happen and what shouldn't happen, and from the ideology perspective of international theory, and step into the world of realism. There is a sentiment that when you are at an existential threat, that realism starts to have a bigger say over idealism. I'm not saying this is right or wrong from a Catholic perspective. I'm just saying, like, I would be very, very unsurprised if behind the scenes there are agreements that are being made, partnerships that are being identified, that should these bad actors raise a significant level of threat, that we will soften some of these guardrails and do what is necessary so that this values-based world that we believe in will triumph. We have seen evidence of this in previous wars, not always with beautiful results, but sometimes with practical good. So, yeah, so that's
I appreciate that, Andrew. And I would say the analogy is actually unrestricted submarine warfare in World War I and World War II, where initially the Allies and the Germans and the Axis agreed not to have unrestricted submarine warfare where they would sink, commercial ships that have no combatant value. Very quickly that dissolved. And the Germans eventually had unrestricted convoy warfare. And in fact, relevant to this interesting debate and very tragic debate about the quote unquote double tap that Hegseth did on the boat, with those potential survivors. I mean, you had a situation where with the unrestricted warfare that the Germans were engaged in, there was a captain and his crew which had attacked with grenades a sinking ship or some people on it. They were surviving, and they were all executed at the Hague. I mentioned this because there was that initial agreement, which eventually, due to the exigent circumstances which you've just described, Andrew, pushed everyone towards absolute survival. And it's like, hey, if they're going to do it, we have to do it. And, it's obviously mutually assured destruction is analogous here too. I just heard recently, it was a couple months ago, I think it's Schmidt over at Google, right? That's his last name? Yeah.
Schmidt.
Yeah. He was talking about how China should be given the keys to, wait till I go with this. Said we should give China the keys to basically the cyber warfare unlock in the United States to destroy the American cyber infrastructure, and that China should give us their keys to create a new Cold War mutually assured destruction in the digital space. This is perhaps the worst idea I've ever heard, but my point of saying this is, we were talking about intent and on all these types of things. Taylor, you're so generous, in saying that perhaps they just have a bad Catholic anthropology or no anthropology at all, or even understanding of what the human person is. And I am grateful to you for that generosity. However, I fall more on the realist side that they have no interest in the human person, frankly. And so it's not that they have a deficient view of the human person. They don't even have a view of the human person. So, Taylor, how would you address this issue of realistic competitiveness in artificial intelligence development and ethical constraints that we're applying that may just be ignored when the rubber hits the road?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a good Catholic way to answer this in many ways, I feel like, because we're eschatologically oriented. Until we get to the other side, there's always going to be war where there is just no good outcome out of it, right? And I completely believe in spiritual warfare as well, and that we as human actors are definitely caught up in that and choose bad and do evil things for the purpose of them being evil, right? And all of that is true and can happen and does as part of this, and as a result of our the combination of our free will and our massive creative capacity, we can create things that can do terrible things to other people and to our planet. And that's a reality we have to live with. And the realist side of things there, I think still can be oriented towards the reasons for why we're doing it. And this gets to some of the just war theory that Andrew was talking about as well, certainly. Fighting the enemy because you love what is behind you rather than hating what is in front of you. And that doesn't justify all the things that you might do in defense of the things that you love behind you. And there's a lot that has to be woven into that, not only because I don't believe in these sort of, well, I guess I'm going to be the damned one because I have to do what's good for my nation or for my family, and I'm just going to have to live with all of these terrible choices that I must make because I'm forced into that, right? I don't think
the Lord never forces us to sin.
Exactly, right? And so there's even in those moral, even in those I don't want to say edge cases because we've had enough wars to say that they're not edge. Throwing that out the window doesn't make you a better soldier, doesn't make you a better general, doesn't make you a better tactician.
Makes you more brutal.
It makes you more brutal. Yeah,
animal-like.
Exactly, and that you don't need to throw that out of the window to be a brilliant tactician, to help the overall cause of humanity trend towards what we all see as good, true, and beautiful in life. And so I don't want that to be lost when one says that one is a realist, and even in these very hard situations where people will die and evil will be combated in ways that make it very hard not to be brutal. But that's the line that we have to tread in our worldview, right? And so that's the thing that I think needs to be still part of the conversation, even in those extreme situations.
And we do have a very specific worldview, Taylor. Of course, it is a Catholic worldview because it's the truth. Andrew, one of the things I greatly admire about the work that you've done is rather than just rejecting artificial intelligence, which I sometimes seem to flirt with, you have really pushed this idea of augmentation of human connection using technology. And I think that's a very beautiful idea. I think I would like to subscribe to that idea. When I look at this situation, I mentioned Eric and Sam and all these other folks that seem not to have the same view of the human person that we do. It's all the more urgent that we get the message to them. And so I guess my question to you, Andrew, the challenge is how do we as men and women of goodwill get the ideas of Christ, the ideas of love and peace and mercy and the human anthropology that we're talking about to these men who just don't know the information about this subject? How do we get them to the table?
Love this question. So there is this topic of ecosystems that's come up on this call. And I think there's a couple of levels for how we really get our hands dirty and climb into the trenches and influence this. So one is there's engaging at the leadership level, the Pope putting out tweets about what builders and entrepreneurs should be doing and how we need to promote moral goodness inside of our innovations to the point where it got a response from Mark Andreessen and caused controversy, where Andreessen eventually had to delete his tweet because of how much pushback he got. That was one level of engagement of just trying to highlight from the top to top, what the influence could be. In the middle layer, there are a number of key stakeholders, whether it is civil society, it is think tanks, it is education, universities, it is nonprofit groups, trade groups. There are ways to influence the people around, say, Sam Altman. While he himself may not necessarily be seen as like the moral leader for what AI should look like, there are certainly people around him that care very deeply about this. Similar communities at Meta, similar communities where Taylor's working as well. There's so much good to be done there. The Vatican is trying to engage at that level as well with Minerva Dialogues and other engagements like the one that we were a part of. And thirdly, this is, I think, a very empowering message, is that there's a lot of grassroots efforts that we could be doing. There's no end to what we could be doing. So in terms of just sheer relationship and reaching out to individuals that we know, seems like the higher you go, the more you have insiders that you really count on. And so just 4 days ago, as a follow-up to the forum that we went to, there was a workshop chat that we had in a meeting where people more and more are saying that they're presenting at different forums, they're engaging in different communities, they're making those inroads, and they're able to translate the values of the Catholic thought into more technical language so that we can be on the same page for where the secular power structures are. And I think that's where the church should really dial in much harder, is articulating the language of regulations, articulating the language of business models, understanding the reality of what companies are dealing with. So those are some ways that I think we can influence not just those key leaders you identified, but the influencers who are shaping them as well.
I think that's awesome. I think communication, coordination, talking to these folks, engagement, all of these type of things are absolutely critical. The only thing that I would add to what you say is prayer. I think it would be cool. And maybe this is my question to you, Taylor. If you had to pick a saint that all of the listeners and viewers could pray for their intercession on the subject of artificial intelligence and human flourishing and what our Holy Father is calling us to proclaim to the world, which saint would you pick?
Yeah. Well, this is a little bit self-serving, but I was, my middle name is Thomas, not after Aquinas, but after the apostle, because, my family converted to Catholicism when I was 10. There's something really interesting about Thomas, right? He was very concerned about reality. So concerned about reality that he didn't quite believe that Christ had risen from the dead until he put his finger into the nail marks in his hands and his hand into his side. So there's actually I feel like Thomas is our guy here. I know our Lord said, blessed are those who believe, who haven't done that. But you gotta love reality as much as Thomas the Apostle did in these times, I think. There's even a phrase in the tech ecosystem called you have to go out and touch grass, and I think this is the Catholic equivalent of touching grass. You gotta go get you some Jesus there.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, that's funny. It's another thing that we have in common. My son's middle name is Thomas, and I named him after the apostle too. That's pretty awesome. Thomas Aquinas is fantastic too, and Thomas More and all these other fantastic Thomases. My father is Thomas, also an awesome guy. So Andrew, who would you pick?
I will pick Saint Charbel, and as a Maronite priest from different folks than the Latin Rite, I really like how he centers on just pure spirituality and the human connection in the immediate moment. So as Taylor highlighted, there's an eschatological view that we take. It is grounding to have, in some ways, a saint of pure inefficiency, pure total reliance on the Lord, pure mysticism that we should still center on. I love talking about the practical impact of what we can do day to day, but there's still something incredibly counterintuitive and immensely powerful by just centering on a purely non-tech world, and Saint Charbel for me exemplifies that.
I love both your answers. I'm going to, first of all, take them both. We'll take all the prayers we can get, all the intercession we can get. I really think you said something very important there, Andrew. And that is, in a way, you said it's okay not to be productive. Like leisure is part of being a human. And one of the cults that I think exists as a replacement of Christianity in the United States is the productivity cult. Grind culture, where you're always trying to get more, work harder, achieve more. For what? And nobody ever asked that question, right? I guess it's for like personal satisfaction or like, I don't know what, to be honest.
It's an escape.
It is an escape. Yeah, it's an escape, man. Tell me more about that, Taylor.
Yeah, because if you're working, you have to focus on the task at hand rather than the other places in your head where conversation should be happening.
Man, that hits hard. I remember listening to a priest years ago on Catholic Answers, Catholic.com. He said, if you can't sit alone in silence in your car while you drive from one place to the other, there might be an issue, because to sit in silence and non-productivity is to potentially self-examine. And, if AI is anything, it is external to the man. And the more we use externalities to find happiness, joy, and peace, the more we're going to be disappointed, because peace and joy and mercy are found in the human heart, the indwelling of the Holy Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's lost in the tech world. And I think a lazier America would be a better America. Do you think that's true, guys?
Yeah, I'm all for the Front Porch Republic.
Front Porch Republic. Oh my goodness, I love that. That's Wyoming, by the way. Come to Wyoming. It is the Front Porch Republic. What do you think, Andrew? Is productivity a cult?
It's exaggerated.
You're the most productive guy I've ever met, by the way, and also one of the best guys I've ever met. So you seem to have found a balance.
That's kind. Yeah, there is. Father Schmidt says an idol is taking something that's great and making it the ultimate thing, and we do have a tendency in the capitalism of this country to make utilitarianism, the utility of an action, the ultimate at the expense of relationship. And when you travel to other countries, you can feel that there's often stronger community presence. So productivity is good, right? Like the dignity of work is a big value. The Lord created us in Adam and Eve to do positive labor. But yes, it is challenging if it's the ultimate thing.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would say we can kind of end on a very positive note. Excuse me. And that note is, we are told by our Lord that we are surrounded by a cloud of witnesses. And it's nice to think, when we were at the AI Builders Forum a couple of weeks ago, I remember thinking in advance of our annual meeting at Arimathea, there was about 200 people there, but how many angels were present and how many saints were there praying for us, and our Holy Father there in spirit writing us a letter, and how we have this tremendous force behind us to change the world for the better and to bring people to Christ. And so what I would challenge all of our listeners and viewers is to pray for the intercession from St. Charbel, from St. Thomas, and from St. Joseph of Arimathea, specifically for the conversion of the hearts of the men who are shaping artificial intelligence. And I think if we could build an army of prayer warriors that are listening to this show, we will change the world, not because we are, but because our Lord is, through the intercessions of these saints. So I just want to say on behalf of everyone at Arimathea, and of course myself, thank you so much for being here, Taylor and Andrew. You guys are really awesome men. And I'm walking away from this interview with a little bit of hope that at least I know of two guys. And actually, Matt Sanders, I'll point out Matt Sanders. Matt Sanders has built his company. What's the name of his company?
Longbeard.
Magisterium
and Longbeard. He has like two, I think.
Well, Magisterium's a product, but yes.
Magisterium's the product. Okay, Longbeard's the company. And, here is a man who is dedicating his life to bringing artificial intelligence to the world within a Catholic circle, like inside the Catholic ethics and values that we all hold. What a brave choice. And so I would be remiss in not mentioning him and the other people who are working in the Catholic space who are doing this. And this gives me great hope, because we got good men of goodwill. And let's just bring the rest of them along with us. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for listening and watching Treasures in Heaven. Again, I'm Daniel Catone, your host, CEO of Arimathea, and my guests here, Taylor Black and Andrew DeBerry. Thank you very much for being here, and God bless all of you and what you do.